Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Shang. If you're new here, I make videos about lessons and tips that help us grow both professionally and personally. All of us at some point in our lives have felt that we could be doing something different or that we could be something more. Steven Pressfield, in his book, The War of Art, says that most of us live two lives. The life we live and the unlived life within us. Between the two stands resistance. For me, it came down to whether or not to quit my full-time startup job to pursue my creative passions like teaching and making content. So today I'm going to show you the 5 steps that I used to map out and evaluate all my resistance points to make the final decision of putting my resignation letter at work. And the same framework can actually also be used for other major life decisions like leaving or entering a relationship, moving to new cities, or deciding to pursue our passions. All right, let's dive in. First, we start with the questions. And the 2 questions that I had in mind going into this were, what's holding me back from quitting my job? And what do I gain from quitting my job? And each of these are basically their own mind maps. The second step is to expand out all the factors in a mind map. And the goal here is so that we can break down all the different complexities and factors of the answers to those questions. So here, what I have is what is holding me back, which is a mind map with financial, practical, social, and professional factors. And then the second one is what do I gain professionally and personally? We'll go through the first one first, which is financially, what's holding me back? Well, expenses, right? Like living in San Francisco, paying rent here is very expensive. Cell phone subscriptions, Amazon Prime, Netflix, Spotify, those costs add up. And we've got the car expenses, which includes insurance, gas, maintenance, and tickets, because living in the city, I'm bound to get a ticket here and there. And then we've got food, which includes, I guess, restaurants and Costco runs, and health insurance, which is actually a pretty big deal because this is the first time that I am going to be without health insurance from either an employer or from the government. And that could be the source of insecurity, I think, for me and other people too, right? Because the US, you gotta pay for your own insurance. Next are practical considerations, including, well, I'm in a decently comfortable position at my job, and for what I'm paid to the effort, it is actually pretty good. And having that work from home flexibility helps a lot. It means that I can actually travel, I can be more mobile while still having a full-time job. And because of that, it's like, it is good enough and sustainable. It's very comfortable. And then there's also the Asian mentality, which emphasizes stability, right? And right now, it is a very stable position. And I'm always asking myself, why can't I do both? Why can't I produce YouTube content and write and read and talk to people and learn on my own terms while having this flexible and steady job? I'll get to that in a bit. And then we've got social, right? And the social component is, it comes with that stigma, right? Like unemployment and stuff like that. There's also, I will not be able to travel as much given I have less funding and without a job and less overlanding, which I love. And finally, I can't go out as often. So moving to a new city like San Francisco, I would love to actually connect with more people by going out, going to bars, going to restaurants, going to cafes. I won't be able to do that as much if I don't have a source of funding. And then finally, there are professional considerations, which I will get into in the next step. So the next question that we have in mind is, what do I have to gain, right? Professionally and personally. And on the professional front, if I do quit my job, that means I'm able to focus on improving my personal operating system. And this is from reading more, from talking to people in order to update my perspectives about the world. And I'm one of these people who needs deep focus, needs a big chunk of time in order to get into that flow state of productivity. Otherwise, I'm just not very productive. I just can't crank out as much stuff or the things that I'm proud of if I don't have a big chunk of time. So quitting my job would free up opportunity for that. And also not having that source of funding means that I have to prioritize my resources and my time, it goes into kind of one of my beliefs, which is constraints make us stronger and more creative, right? Because it forces us to prioritize our resources. And then learning. I will have more time to read, to actually call up people, and not necessarily to just interview them, but to also just have coffee chats to understand what they're up to, what they're learning, what fascinates them. That is a great way to learn. And finally, there's agency and drive. It means that I'm able to direct where I want to learn, how I want to learn, where I want to grow, right? That comes with a lot of satisfaction. And on the personal front, it really resolves that resistance, that inner conflict, right? So that I don't have this voice always asking, hey, could I be more? Should I be taking the steps towards that? Because I finally am. And I live for deep conversations. And maybe this is the introvert in me, but I really enjoy these one-on-one conversations that can go into many different rabbit holes. And then there is the urgency, which is life is really short. And I think being able to carve out the time, and time is actually is the non-renewable resource essentially in our lives, right? And I think to be able to use that time to pursue what I want is fundamentally important. And then there is exposure to nature, which would allow me to just stay in nature for maybe a couple days at a time with just a Kindle and a book and channel my inner Thoreau. And finally, there is happiness, which I'll get into a bit. And last but not least is the unification opportunity to essentially combine my personal and the professional interests in one. The third step is to evaluate each factor. And the goal here is to determine whether or not these factors are real concerns or things that we can actually manage, right? And here, what I've done is break out all of the expenses of living in San Francisco. And one of the things that really caused a lot of concern or worry in me was health insurance, right? And after doing some research, I realized it only costs on average around $500 for decent health insurance here in the US, which means that this actually transforms an insecurity, reframes it into an accounting line that I can actually put some numbers behind and manage. And then there is also the subscriptions, which I realized I don't really need Netflix. I don't really watch that much. Spotify is pretty important. But Amazon Prime, I can totally cut that out, right? So both Netflix and Amazon Prime, I can save some money there. And then savings and opportunity cost. And just to be realistic, the total cost of chasing your passions is both the cost, the living expenses, right? And the lost salary, which is the opportunity cost. So the two combined is actually pretty expensive, and I have to be very cognizant of that. And if I have essentially, such a cost that actually incentivizes me to try to figure out a monetization strategy, which will contribute to a sustainable lifestyle, which is really important if I want to continue doing this and not wanting to work for another company, right? And then there's stock vesting, which stock equity for a startup is only valuable if it exits, if it gets bought, or if it goes IPO. So until something like that happens, it's not really a factor. It's not a real concern. Next are the social factors. And I think the first one I can knock out was the unemployment social stigma, because it just doesn't really matter to me as much. Not having the funds to travel, it just means that I have to budget. And if anything, it would just force me to be more still, right? I don't need to be going to Croatia or to Southeast Asia this year, actually. It actually forces me to be in one place so I can actually focus on my work and my creative stuff. And less overlanding, well, that just means that I go into nature just for longer periods at a time to save up on gas costs. and can't go out as often, well, I can be more creative around that, right? I can look for more free opportunities to engage with the community, to hang out with people. You don't always have to spend a boat full of money in order to have fun. Next are the professional concerns, which is actually not too big of a concern because I feel like at this point in my career, I've amassed enough skills and mindsets that I can jump back into working for a company pretty much at any time. The key thing that I learned from this exercise is that the major thing for me is actually the practical considerations, right? I'm always asking myself, why can't I do both at the same time? Why can't I have a full-time job and pursue my creative outlets at the same time? And part of that will be answered by the what do I gain mind map, right? In here, I've starred a few parts that really matter to me, including upgrading my personal OS, that constraints make us stronger, the drive and agency, and finally that, at the end of the day, happiness. And this is where connecting the dots really help. Step 4 is connecting the dots, and this is where the mind map power really comes in because you're able to start seeing the cause and effect relationships between all the factors that you have already outlined. So for example, for me, I've got prolonged exposure to nature, right? What that helps me to do is actually have deep focus. And if I have deep focus, that gets me into a flow state, which actually contributes to both my productivity as well as my happiness. And then there's also drive and agency, and how that makes me feel is, again, contributes to happiness. There is deep conversations that I can have with my free time, and which allows me to connect with people, which also improves my network, which basically contributes to professional growth here, right? But deep conversations also contribute to my happiness because I love these one-on-one interactions. And this resolving of the inner conflict also contributes to happiness. If you haven't already noticed where all these arrows are pointing to, it's happiness. Which brings us to number 5. At this point, I really have to ask myself, is what I gain worth it? Is it worth all of the things that are holding me back, all those factors that I had outlined? And for me, that answer was a resounding yes. So this exercise made it crystal clear that I should start taking steps towards moving away from my job and to start pursuing my creative passions. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Hit that subscribe button if you found this framework useful. And in the comments below, I would love to learn what kind of decisions you're grappling with. And as always, let me know if you have any questions. Until next time, take care.